The intergalactic observation hub buzzed with quiet energy as alien researchers and scientists gathered in the vast, gleaming conference room. The walls shimmered with displays of data and holograms showing the various species under observation. At the center of it all was the newest subject of intergalactic scrutiny: humans. Xylox, a tall, multi-limbed being with a shimmering carapace, presided over the meeting. He adjusted the translator device on his thorax and gestured to the center console, where a hologram of Earth revolved lazily. "Colleagues," Xylox began, his voice reverberating with authority, "we have made significant progress in understanding human biology and behavior. Yet there remains one enigma that defies our comprehension: their self-care routines." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Self-care routines? This was a term the Galactic Collective rarely associated with the warlike, resourceful species known as humans. The alien delegates exchanged puzzled glances, their bioluminescent bodies reflecting the bewilderment in their expressions. From the back of the room, Velik, a smaller, amphibious creature with a soft, translucent glow, raised a webbed hand. "Are these routines of strategic importance?" he asked tentatively. "Or perhaps they're tied to their combat training? Humans are, after all, notorious for their unpredictable and extreme behavior." Xylox hesitated, his shimmering mandibles twitching. "That is precisely what we must determine. Their self-care rituals, though seemingly mundane, are executed with alarming intensity and resilience. We've captured footage for analysis, but—" He paused for dramatic effect. "Those who have observed it directly have reported psychological distress." The room fell silent. Psychological distress? The implications were staggering. Could something as simple as human self-care harbor the same level of ferocity that defined their military strategies? With a wave of his limb, Xylox activated the central display. A series of holograms appeared, showing humans engaged in a variety of self-care activities, lifting heavy objects repeatedly in what appeared to be some form of punishment, immersing themselves in scalding water for extended periods, and running to the point of collapse without any immediate threat. The images were unnerving. "These actions," Xylox continued, "are voluntary. Humans claim they perform these rituals to maintain balance or to unwind. Yet, the strain they willingly subject themselves to would break most of our species." Velik's eyes widened, his translucent skin dimming in fear. "They punish themselves for relaxation?" "Precisely," Xylox said, his voice tinged with awe. "But there is more. Their chemical alterations during these routines, induced by substances they call caffeine and capsaicin, amplify their tolerance for pain and discomfort." An audible gasp swept through the assembly. The mere mention of such substances was enough to make most species shudder. Xylox gestured again, and the holograms zoomed in on a particular human, a woman in her late 20s, lifting weights with a look of determination. Her name flashed across the display: Captain Riley Morgan. "This human," Xylox announced, "has been selected for live observation. She exemplifies their terrifyingly committed self-care. We will monitor her routines up close to unravel the psychological and physiological mechanisms behind this behavior." Velik squirmed. "Are we certain this is wise? What if prolonged exposure to their rituals leads to corruption?" Before Xylox could respond, the display flickered. A live feed appeared, showing Riley in her natural habitat, a Spartan living room transformed into a makeshift gym. Her muscles flexed as she executed a series of pull-ups with unrelenting precision. The feed's audio captured her muttering words of encouragement to herself, punctuated by short, sharp exhales. The aliens recoiled in unison. It was as if they were witnessing a predator preparing for battle. "This," Xylox declared, "is the reality of human self-care. They thrive on struggle. And if we are to understand them, we must endure the same." The room was silent, the aliens paralyzed by what they had seen. For the first time in the history of the Intergalactic Collective, a question hung in the air: were humans terrifying not because of their war machines or cunning strategies, but because of what they did to themselves in pursuit of balance? The observation chamber was alive with nervous energy. The Galactic Collective's scientific team prepared for their most audacious experiment yet, directly mimicking human self-care routines. Xylox stood at the helm, his multi-limbed form emanating confidence despite the rising tension among the researchers. The holographic feed of Captain Riley Morgan continued to play in the background, showcasing her intense regimen without pause. Every bead of sweat she shed, every deliberate movement, and every determined grunt sent ripples of discomfort through the alien audience. Velik, trembling slightly, approached Xylox. "Leader," he croaked, his gills fluttering in agitation. "Must we truly replicate their rituals? Perhaps we could study them further from a distance?" Xylox's shimmering exoskeleton gleamed under the overhead lights as he turned to face the smaller being. "If we are to understand humans, we must experience their methods firsthand. Only then can we grasp the depths of their psyche. This is no longer just research, it is survival." A low hum filled the chamber as a specially designed simulation pod activated in the center of the room. Inside, the environmental parameters had been set to replicate Earth's gravity, atmosphere, and temperature. A series of mechanical arms held equipment: dumbbells, kettlebells, a treadmill, and a small container labeled "Caffeine Stimulant, handle with caution." The sight of it made several researchers recoil. Velik hesitated at the edge of the pod. I volunteer," he said, his voice quivering with reluctant resolve. The room fell silent. It was a brave act, albeit one that bordered on foolishness. Xylox inclined his head in approval. "Very well. Let the experiment begin." The simulation pod sealed with a hiss, leaving Velik alone inside. The equipment came to life, guided by pre-programmed routines extracted from Riley Morgan's daily schedule. A soothing human voice echoed from the pod's speakers, *. "Welcome to your self-care session. Begin warm-up." *. At first, it seemed simple enough. Velik's webbed hands were directed toward a set of dumbbells. The pod's systems adjusted their weight to suit his physiology. He lifted them gingerly, his limbs quivering under the effort. "This is manageable," Velik muttered, though his tone suggested otherwise. Outside the pod, the observers watched with a mix of fascination and dread. The holographic feed split into two, one screen showing Riley effortlessly lifting heavier weights, and another displaying Velik's strained attempts. As the session progressed, the intensity escalated. The dumbbells grew heavier. The treadmill roared to life, demanding Velik run against its relentless pace. His translucent skin began to dim, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Inside the chamber, Velik wailed. "This is not self-care. This is torment." The voice from the pod was indifferent. "Endurance builds character. Continue." The assembled researchers flinched as they watched Velik stumble on the treadmill. His webbed feet slapped against the belt, and his gills fluttered like flags in a storm. Yet, despite his obvious distress, he continued. Some primal instinct seemed to awaken within him, a determination to push forward, however futile it seemed. Then came the next phase, immersion in scalding water. The pod lowered Velik into a tank replicating Earth's hot springs. The liquid bubbled menacingly, steam curling around his trembling form. He shrieked in horror, his translucent skin glowing faintly under the heat. The observing aliens gasped, horrified by the idea that humans willingly subjected themselves to such extremes. "Why would they do this?" whispered an amphibious researcher. "It's as if they're preparing their bodies for destruction." Xylox responded, his voice filled with grim fascination. "Or perhaps they are conditioning themselves to thrive in adversity. Humans turn pain into progress." Inside the pod, Velik's screams gave way to groans of resilience. Despite the unbearable heat, he began to adapt. His skin shifted hues, a natural defense mechanism of his species, allowing him to endure slightly longer. The other aliens watched in awe, many of them taking notes, as the transformation unfolded. But the ordeal was far from over. The final phase introduced caffeine, the human stimulant, into Velik's system. The pod injected a carefully calibrated dose into his bloodstream. Within moments, his eyes widened, and his limbs jerked involuntarily. His heart rate spiked, displayed prominently on the observation monitors. He began to move with frantic energy, his motions erratic yet strangely focused. Velik let out a strangled cry. "I feel invincible!" The observing aliens recoiled in alarm. "It's a drug," one murmured. "They're enhancing themselves with external substances." "No," Xylox corrected, his gaze fixed on the trembling figure inside the pod. "They are redefining their limits. Humans do not accept natural boundaries, they shatter them." The experiment ended abruptly when Velik collapsed, his body quivering but intact. The pod opened with a hiss, and the researcher emerged, visibly transformed. His once dim skin now radiated a faint, steady glow, and his posture was more upright. He looked exhausted yet oddly proud. "They survive this daily?" Velik croaked, his voice filled with equal parts admiration and fear. Xylox nodded solemnly. "And they thrive." The other researchers murmured among themselves, some expressing doubt, others curiosity. A quiet realization spread through the room. Humans were not merely resilient, they were self-made creatures of endurance. Their self-care was a paradox, something that appeared to be agony yet forged unyielding strength. Velik turned to the group, his eyes gleaming with newfound understanding. "We must study more. Learn more. There is power in this madness." And for the first time in their collective history, the aliens began to wonder if they could embrace the same terrifying rituals, not to mimic humanity, but to survive in a galaxy where humans were rapidly becoming the dominant force. The observation hub had descended into uneasy quiet, punctuated by the steady hum of equipment monitoring Velik's recovery. Despite his apparent resilience, the after-effects of his ordeal lingered in every twitch of his translucent limbs. The alien researchers exchanged hesitant glances, their earlier fascination now mingling with a gnawing apprehension. Xylox stood at the central console, his multifaceted eyes locked on the holographic feed of Riley Morgan. She was midway through a grueling self-care routine, her sweat-drenched face reflecting determination rather than fatigue. Each movement, deliberate and precise, seemed to defy the limits of her physiology. Velik, now reclined on a medical pod, broke the silence. "Their self-care rituals, they're not just exercises. They're tests. Challenges. It's as though they're training for war with themselves." Xylox nodded. "You endured only a fragment of what they willingly pursued daily. If this is the foundation of their strength, we must delve deeper. Not merely observe, but understand and confront the essence of their methods." A flicker of unease rippled through the assembly. "And who will confront it?" Velik asked weakly, glancing at the others. None stepped forward. Finally, Xylox raised one of his many limbs. "I will." The chamber gasped as one. Xylox was not only their leader but also their most composed and analytical mind. For him to undergo such an extreme trial was unthinkable. Yet his expression remained resolute. "I will undertake their advanced routines, including the most mysterious component, the psychological rituals. Humans call it meditation. Prepare the pod." The researchers hesitated but obeyed, adjusting the simulation parameters to reflect the highest recorded intensity of Riley Morgan's routine. The treadmill's speed was doubled, the weights adjusted to near impossible levels, and a sensory deprivation chamber was added to replicate the human practice of mindfulness under stress. Xylox stepped into the pod, his limbs flexing in readiness. The seal hissed shut, and the simulation began. Inside, the environment was overwhelming. Earth's gravity pressed against his lightweight form, a relentless force that demanded immediate adaptation. The pod's speakers echoed Riley's voice, her words firm and commanding, asterisk. "Push harder. The limits are in your mind." Asterisk. The first task was weightlifting. Xylox's limbs trembled as he grasped a barbell, his carapace creaking under the strain. With immense effort, he hoisted it above his head, his multifaceted eyes narrowing in concentration. Outside, the observers watched in stunned silence as their leader battled against the unyielding force of the simulation. Next came the treadmill, its belt accelerating to a speed that would have overwhelmed any being unaccustomed to Earth's gravity. Xylux's movements became erratic as he struggled to maintain balance. Sweat, an unfamiliar sensation for his species, began to bead on his shimmering exoskeleton. Inside the pod, the psychological pressure mounted. The simulated environment shifted, bombarding Xylux with chaotic imagery, alien predators, collapsing ecosystems, and the looming threat of extinction. These were designed to mimic human stress triggers. The treadmill's pace increased as if urging him to outrun the visions. Outside, Velik watched with growing unease. "This is beyond reason," he muttered. "Even humans cannot endure such extremes without consequence." The pod transitioned to the final stage, the sensory deprivation chamber. Xylux was submerged in a warm, viscous liquid that replicated Earth's saltwater tanks. The chamber's lights dimmed to black, and silence engulfed him. At first, the stillness was a relief. But soon, the absence of sensory input became suffocating. Thoughts and memories he had suppressed for decades resurfaced with startling clarity. Regrets, fears, and doubts swirled in his mind like a tempest. The human voice returned, softer now, almost a whisper, asterisk. "Face yourself? Only then can you grow." Asterisk. The researchers observed the biometric data streaming from the pod. Xylux's heart rate had spiked dangerously, his neural activity reaching unprecedented levels. Yet he remained inside, enduring the storm. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Then, abruptly, the pod's systems shut down. The seal hissed open, and Xylux stumbled out, his limbs shaking and his carapace dull. But his eyes, those multifaceted orbs, gleamed with something the others could not define. Determination? Understanding? Perhaps both. He took a moment to steady himself before addressing the assembly. "Humans," he began, his voice hoarse but steady, "are not merely resilient. They are architects of their own evolution. Their self-care is not a ritual of maintenance but a crucible of transformation. They do not avoid discomfort, they seek it, mold it, and emerge stronger." Velik approached cautiously. "And the psychological rituals? The meditation?" Xylux's gaze softened. "It is their most dangerous weapon. It forces them to confront their vulnerabilities and transform them into strengths. In the silence, they find clarity. In the chaos, they find purpose." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. The aliens had always viewed humans as unpredictable and dangerous, but now they understood the truth. Humans were relentless not because of their strength, but because of their willingness to grow stronger, no matter the cost. Xylux straightened, his limbs steady now. "We have feared their weapons and their strategies. But it is their self-discipline, their unyielding will to improve, that makes them the most formidable force in the galaxy." The researchers exchanged uncertain glances, a shared question hanging in the air. Could they, too, embrace such a path? Could they learn from humanity's relentless pursuit of growth? For the first time, Xylux smiled, a rare, almost imperceptible gesture. "Prepare yourselves. The next phase of the experiment begins with all of us." The decision to collectively participate in the human self-care experiment rippled through the galactic collective like a seismic shock. Xylux's transformation had inspired awe and fear, but more than that, it had planted a seed of ambition. If humans could temper themselves into unparalleled survivors through sheer willpower, perhaps the same resilience could be achieved by others willing to endure the fire of transformation. The observation chamber became a hive of preparation. Pods were recalibrated to accommodate the physiology of the various species present, from the gelatinous, semi-transparent Quolins to the multi-limbed Draxons. The researchers traded apprehensive glances, their collective resolve tested by the knowledge of what lay ahead. Xylux stood at the forefront, his shimmering carapace dulled but his voice unwavering. "The goal is not to become human," he began, addressing the assembly. "It is to understand their essence. Their strength lies not in their form, but in their unyielding spirit. Let us discover if we possess even a fraction of that potential." Velik, now recovered, was the first to step forward. "If we are to grow, we must begin somewhere. I volunteer again." One by one, others joined him, their courage bolstered by the sight of their leader preparing his pod. Soon, the chamber was filled with beings entering their respective simulation units, the air thick with anticipation. The first few minutes were grueling. The aliens were bombarded with routines tailored to their anatomy but inspired by human principles. Weight training that pushed their muscles to failure, cardio that tested their endurance, and stretches that strained their flexibility. Each species faced unique challenges. The Quolans struggled to maintain their shape under the increased gravity, their gelatinous forms wobbling precariously. The Draxans, accustomed to minimal physical exertion, found their multi-limbs tangling as they attempted human calisthenics. But the real trial came when the simulations shifted to psychological conditioning. Each pod plunged its occupant into a sensory deprivation tank, forcing them to confront their deepest fears. For Velik, it was the vast, empty oceans of his homeworld, the suffocating isolation threatening to consume him. For a Quolan named Myrax, it was the dissonant cacophony of sound, an auditory storm that mirrored the chaos of her mind. Inside his pod, Xylox found himself drifting through memories long buried. The annihilation of his broodmates during a territorial conflict replayed in excruciating detail. Guilt and regret clawed at him, but beneath it all was a voice, faint yet unyielding, asterisk. Face the pain. Learn. Evolve. Asterisk. As the hours passed, the aliens began to adapt. The Quolans hardened their gelatinous bodies, stabilizing under the pressure. The Draxans developed a rhythm, their limbs moving in concert rather than conflict. Inside the tanks, fears were confronted and, in many cases, overcome. Velik emerged from his pod with a steadiness that had not been there before, his once trembling gills now firm and resolute. The turning point came when Xylox's pod opened. He stepped out, his posture straighter than before, his multifaceted eyes gleaming with clarity. "The pain does not diminish," he said, addressing the gathered researchers. "But neither does the growth. We are stronger than we believed." The group reconvened, sharing their experiences. Some recounted moments of near despair, others small victories over their limitations. What united them was a newfound understanding of humanity's methods, not merely a regimen, but a philosophy. "This is more than self-care," Velik said, his voice steady. "It is transformation." The group's cohesion deepened as they continued their experiments, each session building on the last. Over time, they began to replicate aspects of humanity's resilience. The Draxans developed a system of synchronized movement, inspired by human group exercises. The Quolans, once fragile, learned to solidify their forms temporarily, mimicking human physicality. But the most profound change was psychological. The sensory deprivation exercises forced them to confront their limitations and fears. In doing so, they began to see themselves not as victims of their circumstances but as architects of their futures. Word of the experiment spread across the galactic collective. Delegates from other species arrived to observe, skeptical but curious. Some dismissed the endeavor as madness, while others saw in it a glimmer of hope. A coalition began to form, a network of beings united not by biology but by their shared desire to evolve. The moment of reckoning came when the humans themselves took notice. Captain Riley Morgan, the unwitting catalyst of the experiment, received an invitation to witness the results. When she arrived, flanked by her crew, she was greeted by Xylox and his team. The aliens stood taller, their forms radiating a newfound confidence. Riley surveyed the group, her expression unreadable. Finally, she smiled. "You've been busy." Xylox inclined his head. "We have learned from your example, Captain. Your self-care rituals, though perplexing, have shown us the path to strength." Riley chuckled. "I wouldn't call them rituals. Just a way to stay sharp." "To us," Xylox replied, "they are revolutionary." The two groups exchanged knowledge, the humans offering tips on refining the routines while marveling at the aliens' adaptations. The collaboration marked the beginning of a new era, one in which the galactic collective no longer viewed humans as enigmas to be feared but as partners in a shared journey of growth. As Riley prepared to depart, she turned to Xylox. "You've done something incredible here. Just don't forget to take a day off now and then." Xylux's carapace shimmered faintly, a sign of amusement. Even humans must rest, then? Occasionally, Riley said with a grin. But only when we've earned it. As the human ship disappeared into the void, Xylux turned to his team. Our journey is just beginning. Let us continue to push ourselves, not to mimic humanity, but to honor the strength we have discovered within. And so, the Galactic Collective embraced a new chapter, one where resilience, growth, and self-transformation became their guiding principles. They had learned not only about humanity but also about themselves, proving that even the most alien beings could evolve when faced with the challenge of survival and self-care.